3 days. That was all Sam Reed had left before the bank took the gym. Josephine Cole did not know that yet. She only knew the drive from the ranch into Cottonwood Falls had taken 40 minutes longer than it should have, because she had pulled over twice on the shoulder of Route 9 just to breathe. In her lap sat a small tin box, and inside the tin box sat a set of dog tags that did not belong to her. She parked the truck outside Reed Boxing and Fitness a little after 5 in the evening, the August heat still pressing down hard enough to shimmer off the hood. She wore a long-sleeved canvas shirt buttoned to the wrist despite the heat, jeans gone soft and pale at the knee, and boots that had clearly walked more ground than pavement. She left the tin box locked in the glove compartment and carried only a worn duffel bag through the front door. Inside, the gym smelled like every gym does, leather and sweat and old rope. A dozen fighters worked the bags and the mats. In the center of the main ring, a young man was finishing off a sparring partner half his size, and finishing him hard. Josephine took a seat on the bleachers along the back wall, set her duffel at her feet, and pulled a paperback from the side pocket. She did not look up when the young man in the ring landed a knee that folded his partner to the canvas. She did not flinch at the sound. Her breathing stayed slow and even, the kind of even that only comes from years of practice, the kind of even a person learns when flinching gets people killed. What nobody in that gym knew yet was why her sleeves stayed down in 90-degree heat, or why her eyes tracked every door in the room without her ever seeming to look. What they also did not know was that the man now stalking toward her, chest still heaving from the fight he had just won, was about to become the reason the whole town found out. Colt Bishop pulled off his gloves with his teeth and looked straight at her like she owed him something. "You lost, sweetheart," he said, loud enough for the whole room to hear. "This is not story hour." Colt Bishop was 26 years old, 6'3", and the closest thing Cottonwood Falls had to a celebrity. He rode bulls on the weekend circuit, fought amateur MMA on Thursday nights, and carried the last name of the family that owned half the county, including, as of very recently, the note on the building Sam Reed had spent 30 years turning into a gym for kids who otherwise had nowhere to go after school. Colt did not know that part yet either. He only knew a stranger was sitting in his gym not watching him, and that offended him on some deep unexamined level he had never bothered to name. "I am just waiting on the mats to clear," Josephine said, not looking up from the page. "I spoke to Sam already." Colt glanced toward the office, where Sam Reed stood in the doorway with a phone pressed to his ear and a look on his face like a man doing arithmetic he did not want to finish. Sam Reed was 61, built like a fence post, with hands scarred from 3 decades of rapping the knuckles of other fighters before his own. He caught her eye through the glass and gave her the smallest nod, the kind of nod that meant not yet, give me a minute. Colt turned back to Josephine, stepping closer, close enough that his shadow fell across her book. "You know what this place is, right?" he said. "Real gym. Real fighters. Not a library." "It is a biography," Josephine said. "And I am not blocking anyone." "You are in mine," Colt said. "I do not like people sitting in the dark judging." "I am reading," Josephine said. "That is all that is happening here." Behind Colt, a cluster of his friends had drifted over, phones already rising, sensing a show. One of them, a wiry man named Dutch Pruitt who worked part-time collecting on the family loan and spent the rest of his time trailing after Colt, laughed loud enough to carry. "Ask her if she wants to go around," Dutch said. "See if the library has a right hook." Josephine closed the book, slow and deliberate, and set it on the bench. Up close, Colt could see her eyes were a pale, flat gray, and there was nothing in them that resembled fear. That was the first thing that truly bothered him. The second thing was that she was already calculating the distance between his lead foot and hers, though he had no way of knowing that. Sam Reed hung up the phone and came out of the office at a near run, because he knew that particular stillness in her posture, and he had a bad feeling about where the next 60 seconds were headed. "Colt, back off," Sam said, stepping between them. "She is a guest." "A guest who thinks she is better than everybody in here," Colt said, not moving. "I did not say that," Josephine said. "You did not have to," Colt said. "It is all over your face. That whole quiet act. You think it makes you interesting. It makes you rude." Sam pressed a flat hand against his chest. "Enough," he said. "Go hit the showers. We are done for the day." Colt swatted the hand away, and something in his voice sharpened into something closer to cruelty. "We are done when I say we are done, Sam. And considering your situation right now, I would think twice about telling a bishop what to do in a building the Bishop family practically owns." The room went quiet in a different way then, quiet with the particular discomfort of people realizing a threat had just been spoken out loud in front of witnesses. Josephine watched Sam go pale, the color draining out of his face, and understood in the space of 2 seconds exactly what kind of trouble she had driven into. "You heard that, right?" Colt said, turning back to Josephine with a grin. "Old Sam here is 3 days from losing this whole place to the bank. $12,000 behind on the note. My family holds paper on this building now, since the Cottonwood Falls Trust bought it up in June. Friday, the sheriff comes with the auction notice, and this place becomes a parking lot for the new feed store." "Colt," Sam said, low in warning. "What?" Colt said, spreading his hands. "She is new in town. She should know what kind of place she wandered into." Josephine looked at Sam, and Sam looked back at her with an expression that asked her, silently, not to say what she knew, which was that the tin box in her glove compartment held the dog tags of the only son Sam Reed had ever had, and that she had driven 1,100 miles specifically to put them in his hands. $12,000, Josephine repeated quietly. "By Friday." "That is right," Colt said, delighted to have an audience. "Unless somebody in this sad little gym has that kind of money sitting around, which I promise you they do not." Josephine stood up. It was not a dramatic movement. She simply rose from the bleacher the way a person rises when they have decided something, unhurried, weight settling evenly onto both boots. But something about it made Colt take half a step back before he caught himself. "I will make you a wager," Colt said quickly, recovering, because backing away from a woman half his size in front of his friends was not something his pride could survive. 3 minutes in the cage with me. You last 3 minutes, standard rules, no elbows, no knees to the head. I write Sam a check for $12,000 myself. You tap out or you quit and you walk out of here and never come back, and Sam here can explain to you exactly how it feels to lose everything he built." "Colt, no," Sam said sharply. "Absolutely not. She is a guest in my gym, not a fighter." $12,000, Colt said again, savoring it, looking only at Josephine now. "Or are you all quiet confidence and no spine at all?" The gym had gone fully silent. Even the heavy bags had stopped swinging. Dutch Pruitt had his phone up and recording, already grinning at the footage he expected to get. Somewhere in the back, a 15-year-old boy named Marcus, one of the free program kids Sam trained for nothing because his mother could not afford lessons, was watching with his fists clenched at his sides, too scared to speak up for the woman with the paperback. Josephine looked at Sam. His eyes were pleading with her to walk away, and for good reason. He did not know what she was. He only knew she looked tired and thin, and like she had already been through more than any person should be asked to carry in one lifetime. But Josephine was doing the math too. $12,000 was less than what the government had once spent training her to break the collarbone of a grown man with her bare hand. It was less than what she had spent, in blood and years, learning exactly how much force it took to put a much larger person on the ground without killing him. 3 minutes, Josephine said. His grin spread wider. "Perfect," he said. "Suit up, sweetheart." Near the equipment rack, Marcus had gone very still, his broom forgotten against the wall. He was the only person in the gym young enough not to have learned yet how to hide what he was feeling, and what he was feeling plainly was fury on behalf of a woman he had known for exactly 10 minutes. He looked at Dutch Pruitt, still filming, still laughing along with the friends of Colt, and something in him shifted, quiet and permanent, the first small crack in a loyalty that had never really belonged to Colt in the first place. "You should not do this," Marcus said, so softly that only Sam heard him. "It is not fair." She did not even want to fight him. "Nothing about tonight is fair, kid," Sam said, and put a hand briefly on his shoulder, because it was the only comfort he had time to offer before he had to go find gloves that would fit a hand smaller than any he usually wrapped. Sam caught her by the arm on the way to the locker room, his voice dropping so only she could hear it. "You do not have to do this," he said. "I do not care about the gym that much. I care about you walking out of here in one piece." "I have been in worse rooms than this one, Sam," Josephine said quietly, and for the first time that evening, something in her voice cracked just slightly, enough that Sam heard it and went still. "What do you mean worse rooms?" Sam said. "Who are you really?" "I will tell you everything," Josephine said. "Tonight. After. There is something in my truck that belongs to you, and I have been trying to find the courage to hand it over since I crossed the county line this morning." Sam went pale, the color draining out of his face, Some old soldier instinct in him recognizing the shape of that sentence even before he understood the words. Josephine, he said, his voice suddenly very small. Is this about Eli? Josephine could not answer that yet. She only squeezed his forearm once hard, the way people do when words are not going to hold the weight of what needs saying, and walked toward the locker room to wrap her hands. When she came back out, she had traded the canvas shirt for a plain gray tank top, and for the first time the room saw what the long sleeves had been hiding. A pale, jagged scar ran from her left shoulder down to her elbow, old and long-heeled, the kind left by a piece of metal moving very fast. Beneath it, half hidden by the scar tissue, was the edge of a tattoo, a small trident inked in black that had faded at the corners. Marcus, the 15-year-old in the back, was the only one who recognized it, because his older cousin had one just like it. He opened his mouth to say something and then thought better of it, watching instead. Colt did not notice or did not care to. He was already in the cage, bouncing on his toes, playing to the small crowd that had gathered along the fence, phones raised, waiting for an easy win they could post online before dinner. Josephine stepped through the cage door. The latch clicked shut behind her. She did not stretch. She did not shadow box. She simply stood in the center of the mat, feet shoulder-width apart, breathing slow and deliberate through her nose, for counts in, for counts held, for counts out, a rhythm that had once kept her heart rate steady while bullets passed close enough to part her hair. Sam stood by the fence with the stopwatch trembling slightly in his hand. Protect yourself at all times, he called out, his voice rougher than usual. 3 minutes. Touch gloves. Colt touched her gloves with a smirk. I am going to enjoy this, he said quietly, just for her. You talk more than anyone I have ever hit, Josephine said. Time, Sam called. Colt came forward fast, faster than his size suggested he should be able to move, and the first exchange did not go the way anyone expected. He threw a jab to test her distance and Josephine let it land. It caught her high on the cheekbone, snapping her head sideways, and a thin line of blood opened above her eyebrow almost immediately. A gasp went through the small crowd at the fence. Marcus flinched like he had been the one hit. Colt followed the jab with a hard right cross, and this one landed too, square on her jaw, and her feet actually left the mat for a half-second before she caught herself against the cage. For a moment she looked exactly like what Colt wanted her to look like, outmatched, hurt, seconds from finished. This was the first stage and it was real. Nobody in that gym, least of all Colt, was pulling punches, and Josephine had chosen not to slip the first exchange, had let herself get hit on purpose, because the fastest way to learn how a man fights is to survive the punch he is proudest of. Get up if you can, sweetheart, Colt said, already turning to the crowd for approval. She got up. It was not graceful. Her legs were unsteady for a moment, and she pressed the back of one glove to the cut over her eye, smearing blood across her cheekbone, breathing hard through her nose, forcing the rhythm back, for counts in, for counts held, for counts out, until her vision stopped swimming at the edges and her balance came back beneath her like a tide returning. That is the difference between hurt and finished, Josephine said, her voice steadier than it had any right to be. I am not finished. Frustration flickered across his face for the first time. A small crack in the performance. He had expected her to stay down, or at least to fold inward the way frightened people do. Instead she had stood back up and was watching him with those same flat gray eyes, and something about that unsettled him enough that his next punch came in sloppier than it should have. She slipped it. Not far, not dramatically, just enough, a small turn of the shoulder that let the glove pass her ear by an inch, and in the half-second his balance tipped forward from the missed punch. She stepped inside and drove the heel of her palm into the meat of his shoulder, not to hurt him, only to spin him half a step offline and buy herself room. Second round of the exchange, Colt tried a low kick to her thigh, hoping to slow her down early. Josephine caught it on her shin instead of her thigh, absorbing the strike without folding, and answered with a short jab to his nose that did not land with much power but landed clean enough to make his eyes water. Around the fence, the mood had begun to shift. Dutch Pruitt had lowered his phone slightly. A woman near the corner, one of the mothers waiting to pick up her son from the evening class, had gone very still, watching with the particular attention of someone who suspected she was seeing something she would want to tell people about later. You are fast, Colt said, breathing harder now, some of the mockery draining out of his voice. Where did you learn that? Places you would not want to visit, Josephine said. At the 90-second mark, Colt abandoned patience entirely and came in with everything he had. A flurry of hooks and a knee aimed at her ribs, trying to end it before the crowd started to doubt him out loud. This was the third stage, the one Josephine had been waiting for since the opening bell, because a man swinging with everything he has is a man who has stopped protecting anything. She stepped into the knee instead of away from it, catching it against her forearm and letting the impact spin his hip open, and in that half-second of exposure she drove a short elbow into the muscle above his knee, the exact nerve cluster Sam once taught every fighter in this gym to avoid hitting by accident, because it drops even trained men to the mat. Colt felt his own leg buckle instantly. His guard dropped on instinct to protect the collapsing joint, and Josephine closed the gap in the same breath, driving a short compact hook into his exposed ribs. Not his jaw, not his temple, precisely into the soft tissue below the ribcage where the liver sits. The sound it made was quiet, almost nothing, but the effect was immediate. Colt went the color of old paper, the last of it draining from his face in an instant. His mouth opened and no air came out. He folded to one knee, one arm wrapped around his own side. And for the first time that evening the gym was completely, perfectly silent. Marcus had both hands pressed over his own mouth, while Dutch Pruitt let his phone hang forgotten at his side. Sam stood frozen at the fence, stopwatch ticking unwatched in his hand. "Get up if you can," Josephine said quietly, echoing his own words back at him, though there was no cruelty in the way she said it, only a kind of exhausted patience. Colt, gasping, furious, humiliated, forced himself back to his feet anyway, because pride is a stubborn animal even when it is losing, and lunged forward in a desperate double-leg takedown, trying to use the last of his size to finish it his way. This was the fourth stage. Josephine had faced worse than a wounded, exhausted amateur closing distance in a straight line, in rooms with far less light and far higher cost for a mistake. She sprawled her hips back, driving her weight down across the back of his neck, and Colt went face first into the mat with a sound that emptied the last of the fight out of the room. She did not celebrate. She did not look toward the crowd. She simply transitioned, sliding one arm beneath his chin, locking it against her own shoulder, her legs hooking his hips to flatten him fully to the canvas, and applied just enough pressure to make the room understand exactly how outmatched he had been from the opening bell. "This is not sport for me," she said quietly, close to his ear, her voice even and almost gentle. "I did not want this fight. You made me choose it. Tap when you are ready." Colt clawed at her forearm for 3 full seconds, the fight draining out of him with every heartbeat, before his palm slapped the mat twice in surrender. "Time," Sam shouted, and this time the buzzer had genuinely sounded, the stopwatch finally reaching 3 full minutes. "Let him go." Josephine released the hold instantly and rolled off him, sitting back on her heels, breathing hard, blood still tracking slowly from the cut above her eye down the side of her face. She did not look triumphant. She looked, more than anything, tired, and a little sick with herself for enjoying none of it. The cage door swung open, and it was not Dutch Pruitt or any of the entourage who came through it first. It was a sheriff deputy car pulling into the gravel lot outside, lights off but unmistakable, followed a moment later by Deputy Ray Alvarez walking through the front door with a folder under his arm, and an expression that suggested he had not planned on walking into the tail end of a cage fight. "Sam," Alvarez said, glancing at the ring, then at Colt still catching his breath on the mat, then back to Sam. "We need to talk. Got some paperwork here about the Cottonwood Falls Trust that the county assessor thinks you are going to want to see before Friday." Colt sat up slowly, wiping blood from his own split lip, and something in the way Alvarez spoke made his head snap around. "What paperwork?" Colt said. "Turns out the appraisal your family used to justify calling in that note was about 40% low," Alvarez said, not unkindly but not gently either. "County Records Office flagged it this morning after somebody, and I am not saying who, sent over the original assessment from 3 years back. Looks like somebody at First County Bank backdated a signature to push the foreclosure through before the real appraisal could surface." Every eye in the room went to Dutch Pruitt, who worked part-time as a loan collector for exactly that bank, and whose face had gone the color of chalk. "I did not," Dutch started and then stopped because nobody in that room believed the sentence he was about to finish. Marcus, still standing near the equipment rack where he had watched the whole fight unfold, spoke up before anyone else could fill the silence. "He backdated a form last month," Marcus said. "I saw it on his laptop screen when he was in here waiting on Colt one afternoon. I did not know what it meant then. I do now." Dutch turned on the boy with real venom in his voice, telling him to shut his mouth about things that were not his business, and it was Colt, still sitting on the mat with one arm wrapped around his own ribs, who told Dutch to leave the kid alone, in a voice nobody in that gym had ever heard him use before, tired and stripped of every bit of its old swagger. It took less than an hour for the full shape of it to come out in the halting, overlapping way small-town truths usually do. One person talking over another in the gravel lot outside the gym while Josephine sat on the tailgate of her own truck with a wad of gauze pressed to her eyebrow and Sam wrapped an old towel around her shoulders like she was the one who needed protecting, not the other way around. The Bishop family, it turned out, had been quietly buying up notes on half a dozen small properties along Main Street for the better part of a year, using a shell company called the Cottonwood Falls Trust, then leaning on a friendly loan officer to call the debts due early using appraisals that were years out of date and thousands of dollars too low. The plan, as best anyone could piece together, was to force a wave of quiet foreclosures, buy the land back at auction for pennies, and resell the whole block to a regional feed store chain that had been quietly courting the family for months. None of it had ever been personal between Sam and the father of Colt. The gym was simply the last domino in a row the elder Bishop had been tipping over for a year, and Colt himself, arrogant and entitled as he was, had genuinely believed the whole thing was just good business, the way his father had raised him to believe it. Deputy Alvarez made 2 calls from his cruiser, one to the county attorney and one to a reporter he happened to know at the regional paper. And by the next morning the story had already started moving through Cottonwood Falls the way stories do in towns small enough that everyone still waves at everyone else on the road. By Wednesday, 2 days before the foreclosure was set to go through, county officials issued a formal correction voiding the inflated debt calculation entirely. First County Bank suspended Dutch Pruitt without pay pending an investigation, and the regional manager of the bank, a nervous man named Halloran who had clearly known more than he wanted the sheriff to find out, drove out personally to shake hands with Sam and apologize on behalf of the institution, though nobody in town believed the apology was about anything other than avoiding a lawsuit. Halloran stood in the gym doorway turning his hat over in his hands, admitting in front of Sam and Josephine both that he had signed off on the early call without reading the appraisal closely, that he had told himself it was just paperwork, and that he intended to say the same thing to the county attorney under oath rather than let Dutch Pruitt carry the blame alone. What surprised people more was what happened after. Neighbors who had never set foot in Reed Boxing and Fitness started showing up with casseroles and folding chairs and, in a few cases, checks. A rancher named Pete Alvarado, no relation to the deputy, wrote a check for $800 and said only that his own boy had gotten through a rough stretch a few years back because Sam let him train for free and never once brought up the money. A retired schoolteacher organized a bake sale in the parking lot of the feed store the Bishop family had been trying to expand, and raised $1,100 in a single Saturday morning. By the end of the week, the gym had more than enough in donations to cover the debt outright, even with the inflated appraisal voided. Marcus, the 15-year-old who had watched the whole fight with his hands over his mouth, started showing up an hour early to every class after that, sweeping the mats before Sam even unlocked the front door, and told his mother more than once that he wanted to learn to move the way that woman moved, quiet until it mattered. The county held a small hearing the following month, more formality than drama, and the mayor of Cottonwood Falls, a soft-spoken woman named Ruth Alvarado, used the occasion to announce a new ordinance requiring any commercial appraisal used to justify an early loan call to be reviewed by an independent county assessor before it could take effect. She stood at a folding table in the same gravel lot where the neighbors had once brought casseroles and told the small crowd gathered there that the town had come within 3 days of losing a place that had quietly kept more kids out of trouble than any program the county had ever funded with its own money, and that it should not have taken a stranger walking through the front door to prove that worth out loud. The regional paper ran the story on its front page under a headline about a quiet reckoning in a small Texas town, and for a few weeks people Josephine had never met stopped her at the feed store or the diner just to shake her hand and say thank you, which embarrassed her far more than the fight ever had. Colt himself did not disappear from town, and did not get run out on a rail the way some of the angrier voices in Cottonwood Falls seemed to want. Instead, in the strange, slow way that small towns sometimes manage justice better than courts do, he simply stopped showing up as the person he had been. He came back to the gym 11 days later, alone without his entourage, and asked Sam, quietly and without any of his old bravado, whether he could help repaint the front of the building before winter. Sam let him. Took 3 weekends. Nobody made a speech about it. Marcus, painting the trim beside him one Saturday, asked him once why he had come back, and Colt, staring hard at the brush in his hand, only said that he had spent his whole life being told that winning was the only thing that mattered, and that 3 minutes in a cage with a stranger had been the first time anybody had ever shown him different. He did not become a good man overnight. He still had the temper he had inherited from his father, and he still carried the family name that came with all its weight in that town, and there were people in Cottonwood Falls who never fully forgave him for the fear he had put into that gym, and that was fair, and Josephine never told him otherwise. But he stopped fighting for an audience. He started training the youngest kids in the free program instead, patient in a way nobody who had known him a year earlier would have believed, and when his own father was quietly indicted the following spring on charges related to the appraisal fraud, Colt did not defend him, and did not attend the arraignment, and told Sam only that some debts a man has to pay by himself. That first night, though long before any of that had settled into its shape, Sam sat across from Josephine at the small kitchen table in the apartment above the gym, the tin box open between them, the porch light outside buzzing against a curtain of moths. He held the dog tags for a long time before he said anything, running his thumb over the stamped letters like he could read them better by touch than by sight. "He talked about you all the time," Josephine said quietly. "He used to say his father built that gym so kids in this town would always have one place that was theirs no matter what happened to the rest of it. That is what he was thinking about the night everything went wrong. He was worried about you losing the building before he even had time to worry about himself." Sam did not answer for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice was rough and quiet, the voice of a man who had spent 30 years teaching other people how to take a hit and had never once learned how to take this particular one himself. "Were you there?" he asked. "When it happened?" "I was 300 meters out on Overwatch," Josephine said. "I could not reach him in time. I have run that 300 meters every night since in my head, and I still cannot make it shorter." "That is not your fault," Sam said. "I know that," Josephine said. "Knowing it and believing it are not the same thing yet. I am working on it." Sam reached across the table and covered her hand with his, the same scarred hand that had wrapped 1,000 pairs of knuckles, and neither of them said anything else for a long while, and that, more than the fight, more than the money, more than any of it, was the reason Josephine had driven 1,100 miles. She stayed in Cottonwood Falls 3 more weeks after that, longer than she had planned, helping Sam with the repainting and sitting in on evening lessons with Marcus, teaching him nothing more dramatic than how to breathe properly under pressure, 4 counts in, 4 counts held, 4 counts out. She never told anyone in town the full shape of what she had done in uniform, and nobody pushed her for it because Cottonwood Falls, for all its gossip about bank fraud and feed store expansions, had an old-fashioned respect for the things people chose not to talk about. When she finally did leave, it was a quiet Tuesday morning, the kind of pale early light that makes even a small town look larger than it is. Sam walked her out to the truck and did not try to talk her into staying because he understood better than most that some people need long roads and open country the way other people need company. "Take care of that eyebrow," he said, nodding at the thin pink scar that had replaced the cut. "Scars like that do not fade as fast when you are past 30. "I have got plenty already," Josephine said. "One more will not slow me down." She drove the 1,100 miles home in 2 days, stopping only to sleep, and the closer she got to the ranch, the more the tightness in her chest that had been there since the funeral began, slowly, to loosen. The Cole family ranch sat 40 minutes outside a town smaller even than Cottonwood Falls, at the end of a gravel road that turned to dust in July and mud in March, with a house her grandfather had built by hand and a barn that leaned slightly to the east after 60 winters of wind. Josephine parked the truck in its usual spot beneath the cottonwood tree, and for a long moment simply sat there with her hands on the wheel, listening to the engine tick as it cooled and the horses call to each other from the near pasture. Her mother came out onto the porch, wiping flour from her hands onto her apron, and did not ask a single question about the fading bruise along her jaw or the new pink line above her eyebrow, because she had raised a daughter who told her own story when she was ready, and not 1 minute before. "Coffee is on," her mother said instead. "And that mare of yours has been fussing for you the entire week like she knew you were coming." The days that followed had no urgency to them at all, and that, more than anything, was what Josephine had needed. She rose before dawn out of habit, not duty, and walked the fence line while the light came up gold and slow over the eastern ridge. She mucked stalls and mended a section of fence the winter had knocked loose and sat some evenings on the porch steps with her mother, not talking much, just watching the horses move across the pasture in the long orange light, unhurried, the way animals move when nothing in the world is chasing them. Sam called every couple of weeks, mostly to talk about Marcus, who had started winning matches at the regional youth level and had taken, much to the amusement of Sam, to breathing loudly through his nose before every bout, for counts in, for counts held, for counts out, in a fair imitation of a woman he had watched fight exactly once. Colt had finished repainting the whole building and had started, quietly and without telling anyone, paying down a portion of the community program costs out of his own pocket, money his father would have called foolish and that Sam simply called decent. Josephine did not go looking for trouble after that, and trouble for once seemed content to leave her alone. She spent that autumn doing the ordinary work of a ranch, replacing fence posts, moving cattle between pastures ahead of the first frost, breaking a young gelding her father had bought at auction the spring before he passed. And in all of it there was a kind of peace she had not let herself feel in a very long time, the particular quiet of a person who has finally stopped waiting for the next alarm to sound. Some evenings, after the chores were finished and the light had gone the deep orange color that only comes in the last hour before dark, she would sit on the top rail of the corral fence and watch the mare graze, and let herself think, just for a while, about a 300-meter stretch of dry ground she had not been able to close in time, and about a young man laughing about something 11 months earlier she could no longer clearly remember, and about the strange, quiet mercy of a small town in Texas that had, in its own stubborn way, helped her carry it. She was not healed. She understood by then that healed was not really a place a person arrived at, not after certain things. But she was, for the first time in a long while, still and steady and home, and on a ranch where the only sounds after dark were whine through the cottonwoods and the low, contented breathing of horses settling in for the night. That was, for now, entirely enough. Late that autumn, a letter arrived in the ranch mailbox in handwriting she did not recognize, careful and a little uneven, the kind of handwriting a boy uses when he is trying hard to make a good impression. It was from Marcus, telling her he had won his regional match on points, that he had remembered to breathe the way she taught him right before the final round when his legs had gone heavy and his nerve had nearly failed him, and that Sam had let him hang a small hand-drawn trident on the wall behind the front counter, right next to a photograph of a young man named Eli Reed in his dress uniform, so that anyone who walked through the door would understand, without needing the whole story. Explain to them exactly what kind of place they had wandered into. Josephine read the letter twice at the kitchen table, then folded it carefully and set it in the same tin box that had once carried a set of dog tags across 1,100 miles, because some things, she had decided, deserved to be kept together. Outside, the light was going gold over the ridge, and the mare was calling from the near pasture, patient and unbothered, the way she called every evening at exactly this hour, and Josephine pulled on her boots and went out to answer her, in no particular hurry at all.